Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're glad you were able to join us, and we'll start off here. It's right at 2 o'clock, and we know we'll have a few people joining us a couple minutes late. But thanks for making the time today. This is a pretty important topic, and we're glad that you are able to be with us today. My name is Stacey Isaac Barraza. I'm with IB Environmental, and we help GEFA with a lot of these types of events. So you've probably, maybe this is not your first one. That would be a good question to ask though. And so I'll ask that right now. If this is your first online GEFA training event, go ahead and raise your hand. So in terms of logistics, people are pretty familiar with Zoom right now, the Zoom platform. But this is really the first time we're using Zoom for one of these trainings. So you will see the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. And so if this is your first time listening to an online GEFA event, please raise your hand just to get everybody focused and integrated here. We'd appreciate that feedback. So yes, GEFA has several of these types of events every year. So today you're part of a 101 event. Specifically on water. So the GEFA Water Resources Division is offering these. They do them every year. There's a series of 3 webinars as part of the GEFA Water 101 event series this year. So you'll see information if you haven't already on how to sign up for the other 2. One of them has to do with lead service line inventories, for instance, which is another really hot topic. And then the other one has to do with emerging contaminants. So if you've been paying attention to all of the moving parts of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, those terms will be familiar to you. So while the GEFA Water 101 webinars generally discuss SRF and GEFA water funding programs, this year, there's going to be a twist towards the bipartisan infrastructure law funding. So emerging contaminants, and there's a big piece of the additional funding from Bill that has to do with lead service line inventories and replacement projects. So listen out for those. I'll just give a heads up too that GEFA also works with us to offer what I would call maybe regular webinars throughout the year on relevant topics as well. For instance, we did one with them last December, that had to do with septic tank funding and management. So those are a little bit different than the 101s. The 101s, we have GEFA staff themselves presenting. So today we have Amanda, who's a senior project manager in the Water Resources Division at GEFA. In that role, Amanda works with communities to provide low interest financing for water, wastewater, stormwater infrastructure projects. So she is one of the more senior people in the Water Resources Division at GEFA. So a lot of you are probably familiar with her. If you're not, she's pretty approachable. She'll share her contact information here with you at the end of the presentation, and you can feel free to reach out to her or one of her colleagues if you have follow-up questions. However, we do have a question and answer period at the end of the webinar. If you have something burning in between, you can feel free to sort of enter that question as we go along. And we may interrupt the flow of the webinar depending on the type of question it is. But otherwise, kind of save your questions to the end if that works for you. So in her role, like I said, Amanda's been at GEFA for a fairly long time. She handles projects from start to finish. So she's a great person to do this presentation today. So that when we say start to finish, it includes the intake and review of applications for potential borrowers, which we're expecting is most of the audience today. She does loan development, construction inspection, technical assistance to the borrower during the construction. She reviews the pay request, and she does loan closeouts. So from start to finish, cradle to grave. She's also responsible for the administration of the federal capitalization grant awarded each year from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. So you may have realized this too, but a lot of the additional funding for water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure that's associated with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is coming through the State Revolving Fund programs, drinking water and clean water, which GEFA runs. And as you can hear from Amanda's bio, she's very instrumental there. So she has a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Georgia Tech and an Associate's degree in Pre-Engineering from Dartmouth College. She has a PMP, and Amanda's very well qualified, like I said. So I will probably just leave you with that Cliff Note version of her bio. and go ahead and welcome Amanda to start presenting today. Welcome, Amanda. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Stacy. Actually, February of this year, I was 18 years with the state. So you would say I kind of like it here. So I think I might stay a while.
Great.
So let me start my presentation and hope that I do it correctly. Go ahead and share. Okay.
Perfect. It looks great, Amanda. Looks great.
Awesome. I'm going to move stuff around so I can see. All right. So I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you for your time today to attend the first GEFA Water 101 session for the year 2023. So the first one we're doing this go round is for the federal requirements. But first, before we get started, I would like to do a poll. Did any of y'all attend or watch any of the previous GEFA 101 webinars? I believe we did them back in 2020 or 2021. Time is hard.
Okay, so the responses are coming in. Yeah, and I think we did both. I think we kept, because they're online, we were able to keep these going even during the pandemic. So I think they were in 2021 and 2020 as well.
2021 was just a blur.
Right, right. Okay, do we want to close the polls now and share the results? All right, so the results should have popped up for everyone, Amanda. And it's good news in that a lot of folks that you're talking to today, 72% did not attend or watch any of the previous GEFA 101 webinars. So you have a captive audience of fairly new folks, and we have good news for them too. If you did not catch one of the earlier webinars, we can provide a link where you can look at recordings of those, the 101s.
Yes, those first 3 webinars were very helpful. The first one kind of went into our pre-application process and the intended use plan. And then we discussed the application process for GEFA and then the underwriting process, what that looks like during application and taking projects to the board. And then we did a really helpful webinar, I believe, on the state environmental review process where we had EPD come in and present on the process and kind of discuss the flow and the expectations, which is one of the federal requirements that we have to go through to even get a loan to the State Revolving Fund program. I'm not going to talk about that here. I'm going to talk about my federal requirements are after the loan has been awarded and we're in the construction phase of it. But definitely go back and kind of look at those webinars and get kind of familiar with that state environmental review process. All right, so for today's objectives, I'd like to do a very brief GEFA overview, and then we're going to go right into the federal requirements. The Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, or DBE, the Davis-Bacon Act, American Iron and Steel, or AIS, and Build America, Buy America, or BABA. We really like our acronyms here of the government. All right, so a brief overview. So who is eligible to borrow from GEFA? So that would be your local governments and instrumentalities of the state, municipal corporations, county or local water, sewer, or sanitary districts, state or local authorities, boards, or political subdivisions, and non-governmental entities or NGOs whose primary purpose is to permanently protect or conserving land. So here at GEFA, we do have 3 different funding programs. We have 2 pots of money. We have our state funds and we have our federal funds. Our state fund program is our Georgia Fund program. And that Georgia Fund program, we can fund water projects, sewer, stormwater, solid waste, and solar projects. And like I said, it's state funds, and it does have a borrowing limit of $3 million per year per borrower. And because it's state funds, there's no federal requirements, and there are also no principal forgiveness opportunities through this program. In our federal pot of money, we have 2 programs. our Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or the CWSRF, or the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, or the DWSRF. And through the CWSRF, we can fund sewer, stormwater, and solar projects, federal funds, and there is a borrowing limit of $25 million per year. Through the DWSRF, we fund water and solar projects. It's federal funds. It also has a borrowing limit of $25 million per year. And they both have the federal requirements listed here. The environmental approval by Georgia EPD, or the State Environmental Review Process, or SERP, I mentioned previously. And then what I'll be discussing more in depth is the Davis-Bacon wage rate requirements, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise DBE, American Iron and Steel, and the BABA, Build America, Buy America. And these two programs also have principal forgiveness opportunities, which we did discuss in a lot more detail in the previous webinars that Stacy will put into the chat. So let's get right into it. The first one we're going to talk about is a Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, or DBE. And there is a few documents that we send out to the borrowers to include in the construction contracts for these federal requirements. And one of those guidance documents is our supplemental general conditions. And within the supplemental general conditions, we have guidance for Davis-Bacon and Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. And so I think it would be easier and more helpful today to kind of navigate to the to the GEFA website and kind of show you where these are housed and located. And then we'll kind of go through the first part of the document to talk more about the DBE requirements. So let's see if I can do this without messing things up. All right. Can you see the GEFA website?
Yes, Amanda, we can see the webpage.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. Excuse me. So if you go under Water Resources, and over here on the left-hand side, there is loan documents. And if you scroll down, this has our loan application, our loan program policies, our guidance documents on both the SRF programs. And then here is the supplemental general conditions, or SGCs, that I just mentioned. This is your American Iron and Steel special conditions that have to be put into the documents. And then if your project has the Build America, Buy America, or BABA requirements, this document would go in there as well. We're going to focus right now on the supplemental general conditions. And here it is. Let me know, do I need to try to make it larger?
I think, yes, if you can make it a little bit larger, that would be good. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's good. Okay. I want to try not to cut off too much of the page. So just here's the document. We just call it the SGCs for short. It was revised December 7th of this year, or of last year. So hopefully a little more up-to-date links and information in it. Table of contents. The first page, the first real page, the GEFA 3 page, kind of gives a little bit more instructions and general requirements. Before beginning the work of any contract, the owner or borrower must submit this information to GEFA to demonstrate the compliance with the DBE requirements before we can pay for any construction funds related to the contractor for this project. And then there are certifications regarding the EEO opportunity, which is GEFA 9. We'll get to that. And then debarment forms that have to be filled out, which is GEFA 10 page, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So the first real form that has the information on it that needs to be submitted is a GEFA 4 page. So here, the loan recipient or the borrower will put their information. So I'll just use, I live in Marietta. I'll just leave City of Marietta. The SRF loan number, that number is given to the City of Marietta when they apply for the loan. And then here we're going to have the prime contractor's signature, as well as the prime contractor's printed name and title and date. And then here is the signature of the owner or owner's representative, the printed name and title, and the date. This right here, the signature says that you as the borrower have reviewed all of the required documentation. Everything looks good. and you're ready to submit this information to GEFA for approval. And then down here, we have our contact information, which is City of Marietta's contact information, the consulting engineer contact information, the prime contractor's information and phone number and email. And this is the proposed total contract amount. And then this is where we're going to show if we've, what percentages, if for any subcontractors on site that we've had for minority business enterprise or MBEs, or women business enterprise or WBEs. And you can see our goals are 4% for each, which are pretty low, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes it's really hard to hit those goals. But those are the goals that we have agreed upon with EPA. So the next form just kind of goes into detail of what type of information needs to be included with the package. So the list of all committed and uncommitted subcontractors by trade. You would indicate in writing if there are no solicitations were made because the prime contractor is self-performing, which is fine. The prime contractor can self-perform and therefore no subs would need to be solicited. No DBE subs would need to be solicited. It's not required for the prime contractor to use subcontractors. It is required, however, if the prime does want to use subs, that they do the solicitation efforts to get a DBE sub. The next page, which is the GEFA 6 page. Here again, we're putting City of Marietta and the SRF loan number that was assigned to the city. The prime contractor's information here and the total amount of the contract. And then all the subcontractors will be listed here with the trade and the amount for each subcontract. If it's a large contract and you need more room, definitely add an additional page with a table on it that shows the same information. We also need those DBE subs to be identified in some form with the trade and the amount for each subcontractor. And then down here at the bottom is how you're going to document your solicitation for those subcontractors, whether it's a newspaper ad, an internet website, fax, the copies of the emails or letters, and the copies of phone logs, or all the above. Most cases, what we see here is more of copies of emails or that were sent out to the different subcontractors and the different trades. And then there'll be attached a spreadsheet that shows what trade each of those email addresses belong to and whether or not they responded back to it. And there again, also with the copies of the phone logs can be a spreadsheet, contacted subcontractor X on this date, left a message, or talk to Mr. Smith, will get us a quote by whatever date. There just needs to be some sort of documentation where the prime contractor did put forth efforts to solicit for DBE subs. And the next page, the GEFA 7 page, just goes into kind of the 6 good faith efforts that are required to ensure DBEs have the opportunity to compete for procurements funded by EPA or through the SRF. Excuse me. Here are the 6 good faith efforts here. So we want to ensure DBEs are made aware of the contracting opportunities to the fullest extent practicable. Make information on forthcoming opportunities available to DBEs. Consider in the contracting process whether firms competing for large contracts could subcontract with DBEs. Encourage contracting with a consortium of DBEs when a contract is too large for one of these firms to handle individually. Use the resources, services, and assistance of USDOT, the Small Business Administration, Minority Business Development Agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And if the prime contractor awards subcontracts, it must take the steps described in items 1 through 5 listed above. And the DBEs, MBEs, and WBEs must be certified by EPA, the SBA, or DOT, or by a state, local, tribal, or private entities whose certification criteria match EPA's. The next page is just a helpful resource page, GEFA 8. It has links where you can go to find lists of DBEs and their trades. Georgia DOT, City of Atlanta, DeKalb County, US EPA's website. MARTA has a disadvantaged business enterprise program list of subcontractors. So all of these links are helpful. And when you do submit for any of these, remember, we have to have the certification showing where they have been approved as a DBE sub. The next page, the GEFA 9 page, is our EEO certification by proposed prime contractor or sub regarding EEO, equal opportunity employment opportunity. This will be signed by the prime contractor and all subs on site. Here on number 2, if yes is answered, there needs to be, what reports were filed and with what agency. And then on number 3, if no is checked, please explain in detail. And usually the biggest reason for why this is no is it's a small company that only has, 2 or 3 employees. And so it's not required for any of these reports to be submitted. And it has to be signed and dated at the bottom. The next form, which is the GEFA 10 form, is the certification regarding debarment, suspension, and other responsible matters. Basically, this form is saying that the prime contractor and the subcontractors have not been debarred from doing any work on federally funded jobs. Our next page, the GEFA 11 page, is our changes to approved sub forms. This is only submitted if you need to change any subcontractor that was previously approved. And it can be for whatever reason. They're not meeting the deadlines, they're not showing up, whatever that reason is. We would need this form filled out. We'd need the reason why, and then we would have to approve this new subcontractor before they could start any work on site. There is a DBE annual report that is required, this GEFA 12 page. This is work that is paid to any MBE or WBE sub during the federal fiscal year. And that's October 1st through September 30th. So for this coming up year, when we ask for this report, it'll be any work performed from October 1st of 2022 through September 30th of 2023. But we will always send out reminders. We start kind of pinging everybody about a month and a half before the due date in anticipation for folks to submit these reports to us so that we can put the big report together to submit to EPA to show kind of what goals we're meeting. And then this next page right here, the GEFA 13 page, goes into our Davis-Bacon Wage Act. And I'm going to go back to my presentation and go into a little bit more detail on this within my presentation, if I can toggle.
Sure. And while you're doing that, Amanda, which you've done, it's perfect. Yeah. We're back onto your slideshow and we see the supplemental general conditions slide. I just want to give you a little time check. It's 2:24 right now, so I know you have.
Okay, so I need to speed it up.
Maybe, yeah. A couple of questions, if you want to answer them quickly on DBE, though, is if the prime contractor knows a DBE sub, can they just choose that sub and not go through the solicitation process?
No, they still have to put out the solicitation for the DBEs. All DBEs do have an opportunity to bid on the work.
Okay, and then there are a couple other questions about DBEs, but we'll just ask one for the sake of time, and we'll move on. If the prime contractor is a DBE itself, do they still need to solicit for DBE subs? And I believe you said, anyway, yeah, that's the question.
Yes, they still need to solicit. All subs on site would have to be solicited for a DBE sub, even if the prime contractor is a DBE themselves.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll hold the other questions for on DBEs for a little bit later. Let's see how we do with the rest of the content.
Okay. I apologize. It's a lot. It's a lot to work through.
It
So
is.
the next section is the Davis-Bacon Wage Act. So for the Davis-Bacon, there are certified payrolls that have to be submitted weekly. These certified payrolls are for the prime contractor and all subs that are on site, and they must be submitted weekly. Once they start for the prime contractor, they need to continue going. Even if there's no work on site for that week, you would just put no work. The payrolls need to be checked against the wage rates to ensure the minimum wage rates are being met, and I'll show that in the next slide. And the payroll shall be maintained by the contractor during the course of the work and for 3 years thereafter. And that would be the contractor and the loan recipient or borrower, which in this case was the city of Marietta. Here's an example of the wage rates that would need to be posted within the contract documents. And there is a section within the supplemental general conditions that says post wage rates here. So I just pulled this one from DOL. It's for the counties listed here: Baldwin, Bleckley, Dodge, Dooley. But we want to find the construction type heavy. There's different ones out there. There's building, residential, or highway. But for our purposes, it should be the heavy construction type. And the contractor or sub must pay the minimum rate, and either the fringes in cash or in benefits that's listed here. And if for some reason you cannot find the job classification within your rate, there needs to be a wage determination rate done. And there's a form that is filled out by the prime contractor and submitted to the borrower. And the borrower then submits that form to us, and we would send that to DOL for them to make that wage determination, whether they agree with the wage that was presented by the prime contractor or they give a new wage rate. And they have 30 days to respond with that. Each borrower is required to conduct labor standard interviews. And the purpose is to ensure the work actually being done by the worker on site is consistent with the corresponding information on those certified payrolls that are being submitted weekly. And it's a representative sample of interviews to be performed. And a representative sample of interviews, I've been told a couple things, could be 20%, 30%. I always suggest to do at least 50% of the folks on site. And it's not 50% total of all the workers, it's 50% of that particular contractor. So it's the prime contractor, and then if you have any subs on site. So say your prime contractor has 4 or 5 folks out there, I'd say do 2 or 3. Subcontractor has 2, I would do 1. But it is a sample of interviews to be performed for each prime contractor and subcontractor, not just the total of workers out on site. There's a minimum of 2 interviews that are performed for the prime contractor. That's at the beginning of the job and at the end of the job. And the guidance says that the first set of interviews needs to be done within 2 weeks after the first submission of the weekly certified payroll. So that's about 3 to 4 weeks within the beginning of the job, and then about 2 weeks before the end of the job. And then for the subcontractors, it kind of depends on how long they're going to be on site. If they're going to be on site for a month, we just want to do 1 set. We definitely need to make sure that we do get those interviews conducted when those subs are on site. There's also required signage on site. Excuse me, that's your EEO posters, your OSHA posters, and your wage rates. If you can see here over here, there's our wage rates here, and our OSHA posters and our EEO posters. And these must be placed in a site accessible to all employees every day. So if it's a linear project, Most people kind of put it at the laydown area, wherever they're going to go be picking up materials for the day. It can be placed there. It just needs to be somewhere where a worker is going to be able to see it every day. All right, we're going to get into the American iron and steel requirements. So here are the listed of American iron and steel products. One of the following items made primarily of iron or steel that is permanently incorporated into the job. And it's produced in the U.S. What does produced in the U.S. mean? That means the manufacturing and processing of iron or steel must occur in the U.S. And this includes melting, refining, forming, rolling, drawing, finishing, fabricating, and assembly. The product must be made of greater than 50% iron or steel, measured by cost. And the exception to this is reinforced precast concrete. And then I have examples in the next few slides, and they were taken directly from the 2021 AIS refresher webinar presented by EPA, and I believe we're going to drop that into the chat for folks to check out. So here are some listed products: lined or unlined pipes or fittings, pipe clamps, flanges, municipal castings, manhole covers. All of these have to be AIS compliant. Fire hydrants, tanks, meter boxes, curb openings, downspout shoes, bollards, inlets, things like that all have to be AIS compliant. Valves, reinforced precast concrete. They're typically not primarily iron and steel, but it is a listed product that has to be AIS compliant. So the reinforcing bar and wire must be domestic. And the casting of the concrete also must occur domestically. Construction materials like concrete reinforcing bar, rebar, wire rod, fasteners, framing, joists, trusses, decking, fencing, doors, all of these items like this that are permanently incorporated into the project has to be AIS compliant. Things like non-construction materials do not have to be AIS compliant. Your pumps, your motors, your variable frequency drives, SCADA, flow meters, disinfection systems, pump skids, things like that do not have to be AIS compliant. Things that aren't permanently incorporated into your project, like, excuse me, trench boxes, do not have to be AIS compliant. We do require AIS, American Iron and Steel certification letters that must be submitted before we can pay for any of the materials on site. And these letters need to have 5 things on them. We need, it needs to be on the manufacturer's letterhead. It needs to be project specific. We need to list all of the products that this letter is pertaining to. We need the location of the manufacturing, the city and state, the signature of the employee from this particular manufacturer, and then the American Iron and Steel reference within the letter. Some AIS certification common mistakes that we've seen. The manufacturer is not referencing specific project and product information. Just relying on the made in the USA stampings or stickers as proof of AIS compliance. We need that letter. Manufacturers not referencing AIS requirements for the State Revolving Fund. And the certification letters are from the suppliers and not from the manufacturers. There is a national de minimis waiver out there that is applicable to American Iron and Steel. Excuse me. The de minimis items may cumulatively compromise no more than a total of 5% of the total cost of materials. but the cost of an individual item may not exceed 1% of the total cost of materials. And examples of items that are not included and are not covered would be significant process fittings like T's, elbows, flanges, and brackets, distribution system fittings and valves, force main valves, and your pipes. And the de minimis items must be documented in a report. One example of something that can be listed on your de minimis waiver is maybe at a wastewater treatment plant, a roll-up door. Maybe you don't know the origin of the roll-up door, that can be placed on the de minimis waiver. It's not integral to the working of the that particular project. Excuse me. The next federal requirement we're going to talk about is Build America, Buy America, or BABA.
And Amanda, I'm just this is a good point to just remind folks that they can submit questions through the Q&A box. And on that note of questions, as you move into the BABA section, just know that we have a question that's asking if AIS, which you just talked about, and BABA are the same thing. So you might want to tailor your comments to sort of highlight the difference or distinguish between those two.
Okay, so BABA came in part through the Title IX of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act Congress passed in the Build America, Buy America Act, and American Iron and Steel came out in 2014. So just because your project is not BABA compliant doesn't mean it doesn't have to be AIS. So AIS is applicable always across the board, and there's certain criteria that would make a project have to meet the BABA requirements. And I'll kind of get to that a little bit later in the presentation. That kind of shows the national waiver on particular projects that do not have to meet the BABA requirements. So AIS is within BABA as a requirement, and you'll see that kind of further down the presentation. That kind of answer that question? I hope so. Maybe further I get into it, it'll answer the question and give a little more clarity to it. And if not, I'll revisit it.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So it was signed November 15th of 2021, and it went into effect 180 days after enactment, which would be May 14th of 2022. And none of the funds made available for a federal financial assistance program for infrastructure may be obligated for a project unless all of the iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used in the project are produced in the United States. And here's the definition of a project: any activity related to the construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair of infrastructure in the U.S. And BABA applies to all federal financial assistance for infrastructure, not just the bill funding, unless it's covered by a waiver, which we'll discuss a little bit further into the presentation. So BABA covered items, like I mentioned previously, iron and steel, manufactured products, and construction materials that are non-ferrous. Items should only be classified into one of these three categories: items consumed in, incorporated into, or affixed to an infrastructure project, or permanently incorporated, as discussed in the AIS slides. I apologize. Is BABA, does have to be BABA compliant. I lost my train of thought for a second. It does not apply to items brought to and removed from the construction site prior to the completion of the project. For example, temporary scaffolding. That's the same thing we saw and the same requirement from the AIS that was previously discussed. And it does not apply to equipment and furnishings that are used at or within the finished project, like movable chairs, desks, portable computer equipment. There are some approved EPA BABA waivers out there. There's an adjustment period waiver, which is a design planning waiver that will be discussed in the next slide. There's the de minimis public interest waiver. Projects may use non-domestic up to 5% of project cost. This is similar to what we just discussed previously in the AIS section. And there's also a small project award waiver. This waives projects where the EPA contribution is under $250,000. So here kind of is the meat and what we really kind of want to focus into to see if your project will have to meet the BABA requirements. So here are 8 items that would waive your project that initiated design planning prior to May 14th, 2022, when BABA was enacted. And they are submitted your PER or preliminary engineering report or equivalent to the state or to the recipient. That would be GEFA. Issued the RFP or executed contract for design or engineering services. The RFP is request for proposals. Executed an SRF assistance agreement that includes design. For projects designed by recipient, documented initiating design, such as the preliminary engineering report. Solicitation of construction bids. Submitted plans and specs to the state. They do not need to be complete. And to the state, that would be the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. Held a public referendum or public meeting on proposed project, or evidence of new bonds passed or other new funding backing secured. So if your project meets these 8 requirements, it does not have to meet the BABA requirement. And these can be on a case-by-case basis, send the information to us, and we, along with EPA, will determine whether this project meets these requirements. And how do you demonstrate the product compliance? It's the same thing as previously with AIS. We would need to collect documentation for the products received, which would be the signed certification letters. You verify the products used on site are BABA compliant prior to their installation, which there again, the letters would need to be submitted and ensuring that those components are BABA compliant before they are installed. I will say I should have said in this AIS best management practice, and what folks usually do is have these letters with a submittal package from the contractor to make sure that that letter is complete and everything's good. So it's part of the submittal approval process. Maintain that documentation, which should be made available to the funding authority upon request. So that would be GEFA. All of these slides I took directly from the Office of Water Implementation Procedures webinar that was performed, and we are going to drop that link in the chat as well. So here again, how to demonstrate the product compliance. The associated project, the name, project location, contract number, the identity of the product being supplied. It's the same as the previous letter that was discussed in the AIS section. A statement attesting that the products supplied are compliant with BABA requirements. The location, the manufacturing being certified. And signature of the company representative making the certification on that company letterhead or the manufacturer's letterhead. So there is a BABA special conditions document that was on GEFA's website. Within that, there are a bunch of Q&As specifically answered by EPA within that document. And that's also part of the guidance document that would be attached to the construction contract documents between the borrower and the prime contractor. Also, one new requirement through a bill, it says bill required signage, but here again, it's for any federally funded project. So on December 8th, 2022, EPA released a guidelines for implementing the signage terms and condition for the State Revolving Fund programs. And so here on your left is an example of what the signage needs to look like. There is a guidance document, I believe we'll put that in the chat as well, that goes into a lot more detail of what needs to be on that sign, the logos, where you can find the logo. So it needs the Building a Better America emblem. The EPA logo needs to be on there. And recipients are encouraged to use recycled or recovered materials when procuring the sign. So GEFA will kind of put together a sample of what the sign should look like which EPA logo, what GEFA logo, and then also the borrower can put their logo. So down here on the sign itself in the bottom right-hand corner, I've seen that. I think that will be EPA's logo. The circle on the bottom left will be the borrower's logo. And then the rectangle next to that would probably be GEFA's logo. But GEFA will work on a signage and have more guidance on that within the forthcoming weeks. And we'll have that up on our website. So as of that, there's my contact information. I hope I didn't blow through that too fast. I got kind of nervous when DBE kind of took a while, but it was kind of really specific on the documents that are required and everything that needed to be filled out. Just want to make sure that was understood.
No, great. I think we're doing excellent on the timing. We do have a few questions that I was kind of holding just to make sure we have time at the end. So one of the questions is from Tom. He's asking, for the multitude of ARPA projects, should the GEFA guidance used for federal projects be used?
So I'm going to caveat this with, I do not know what the ARPA requirements are, and that was on purpose. Because I have so many federal requirements that I have to deal with. I am not sure of what the ARPA requirements are, but if the SRF requirements are a lot more stringent, which is what I'm understanding, all of our documentation needs to be inserted into the construction contract document. So yes, we would need all of our documents. And so if BABA is applicable, that BABA conditions document would also have to be put into the construction contract documents.
Great. And for the folks like contractors or engineering firms who work in multiple states, just want to give you all a reminder or disclaimer that in the state of Georgia, the SRF program is not the ones running ARPA, which is not the case in other states. So in other states, SRF has, had ARPA put in there and they're running both programs. So just to clarify, that's not the case in Georgia. Okay, another question we have from Leon, Amanda, has to do with signage. Is the signage requirement specific to bill-funded projects or any SRF project?
Which signage? Because I spoke about the required signage for Davis-Bacon and then the bill funding signage. So there's the Davis-Bacon signage that has the OSHA posters, EEO posters, and wage rates. That is definitely required. And then that last slide I showed for the bill funding signage, that went into effect December of 2022. And so going forward, any federally funded project would have that required signage. I just want to make sure which, they're both required, but I want to make sure we're kind of, if there's distinct, and my motion light just went out.
Okay. Which you had predicted, yes, to support that. You said it may go out, but we can still see you. And yeah, if you walk around, maybe you can see in your office too. So Leon, if you have any follow-up questions about, a specific set of signage, feel free to drop that in the Q&A and we will further address that. My guess is he was talking more about the latter one because his question came in at 2:46. But
Gotcha. Okay.
Sarah is asking, for BABA, what should be done if a type of product needed on the project is not made in America?
There is waivers that can be requested. And so we would work with the borrower on what information need to be submitted to GEFA for that waiver request. And we would then submit it to EPA to do their due diligence on whether or not that waiver could be approved. Okay,
great. Thank you. If we go back to DBE for a second here, Amanda, if the DBE goals are met, does the prime contractor still need to solicit for more DBEs? And you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but can you clarify that?
Yes. So the goals are nice. The goals are amazing. But even if you hit those goals, any sub on site would have to go through that DBE solicitation. Okay.
And this next question, I believe, has to do with DBEs too, but I could be wrong. It's asking, how long do interviews usually take? Do we need some more clarification there?
So So the interviews I believe they're referring to are the labor standard interviews that must be conducted for folks on site. I don't think it takes long. I've never conducted them, but I guess it depends on how long it takes to answer the questions and ask the questions. There might be folks on the call that could answer that one a little bit better than me, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Drop it in the chat or in the Q&A if I'm completely wrong on that one. But it was a one pager that you saw, and the questions, you're actually only answering the questions up top. The bottom part is actually filled out by a payroll checker who then checks to make sure that whatever the worker said they were being paid matches that certified payroll that's been submitted.
Okay, great. Well, we'll take your lead there, and we will see if anybody has experience with this, direct experience. Go ahead and raise your hand, and we may try to unmute you and let you respond, or you can take the easy path like Amanda suggested and just drop it in the chat for the rest of the folks on here. Like she said, y'all are the ones doing this, and you may have more experience about this than she does. So, okay, great. We'll look out for those responses on that. Thanks for sharing. Another question has to do with made in the USA. So what are alternatives to relying on that made in USA stamping or stickers as proof of American iron and steel compliance?
So really your best bet is to get that letter, that upfront certification letter from the manufacturer that specifically says what that item is and where it was manufactured. And also, this doesn't say it in EPA guidance per se, and I should have mentioned it earlier, but this was discussed when they came out and did some AIS compliance visits. It was suggested that, sometimes up front when you get that initial letter, which is definitely a best management practice to get it up front along with your submittal process. And it says this product could have been manufactured in Indiana, Alabama, North Carolina, any number of areas. Once that product comes in, that item comes in, grab that bill of lading, that bill of sale, whatever it is that comes with it, that packing slip, and attach it to that letter so it shows exactly where that product came from. And that was a suggestion that came specifically from EPA when they came out to do their AIS site visits. Okay,
very good. Very good. Good to know. So apparently you cannot unmute yourself. So I was kind of going rogue there, and that's not going to work. But do rely on the chat to share your experiences with this last question and about how long the interviews take, or if you have, something burning that you want to share with the group, right? We have another question too about signage, and it probably depends again, Amanda, on which type of signs we're talking about. But the question is, where should the required signage be posted?
Oh, so the required signage, I believe it said, so if you're doing a wastewater treatment plant, kind of at the beginning, where you drive off from the road into the wastewater treatment plant. If you're doing a linear project, I don't know if there's a specific kind of start to the linear project, maybe at City Hall, just somewhere where it's kind of accessible for folks to see the project, but you kind of want it in the same vicinity of the project. I guess we can have that discussion on a case-by-case basis, like with water meters and things like that, kind of what that looks like. But I would think things like that maybe at City Hall or something like that. Okay, yeah, good. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A box at this moment. We will go to the next slide here, and folks still have the opportunity to drop a question in. We do have a couple more minutes here. So we wanted to remind you all of a couple things. First of all, Amanda gave a great presentation and was able to answer your questions in a lot of detail. And that's because like she said, she's been, at the state almost 18 years. But there are several new colleagues of Amanda's at GEFA that you may not know as well as you know Amanda. So she's part of a good team there. They're building it out. And so I want to encourage you to come to some of these upcoming webinars to meet some of her colleagues. So in a month from today, we will be talking about the lead service line inventory and replacement. And if that's not on your radar, folks, it needs to be. So yesterday, EPD held a public meeting about this, and I'm still overhearing questions like, do
do we have to inventory the private side too? Yes. So there's a lot of, I would call, revolutionary things happening in the water industry where lead service line inventories and therefore replacements eventually is concerned. So you don't want to miss this webinar on March 28th, and we'll drop the links here into the chat as well, so that you can click on that and copy and paste it. Another plug for the chat, you want to save that. I hope this feature is enabled, but if you don't know it, if you haven't used it yet, right where you can send a message in the chat, right where it says to whomever, there should be 3 dots. And if you click on those 3 dots, you should have something pop up that says save chat. And you can actually just click that one button and save the entire chat history from this call today, because we have so many important links that maybe you weren't able to follow along everything that Amanda's doing live, but the resources are there for you in the chat. So definitely, let's see, someone is saying that I'm frozen, but that y'all can live with that. And then we are getting the obligatory question about, will the presentation be available to view afterwards? And so, as we mentioned in the beginning, the recording will be available on GEFA's YouTube channel, which, if we put that in the chat before, can someone please drop it in there again? So there's a lot happening in the chat. So I encourage you to save it, save the chat at the end, right? So we have the lead service line inventory and replacement stuff coming up in a month. And there's a lot of traction in that area. There's a lot coming out. There's a vendor that the state's looking at with a database. And in March, at the end of March, a lot of things, sort of announcements will be made. So you want to check that one out. Then there is the April 25th one that's going to be on financing emerging contaminant projects in Georgia. And again, GEFA has sort of a lead person, if you will, or a point of contact on lead, and they also have a different point of contact on emerging contaminants. And of course, Amanda's involved with both. But you'll get to meet some of these people, and even though it's virtually, and sort of be able to contact them with follow-up questions afterwards. So don't miss those 2 events. And again, the chat's pretty active here. You can click on those links or copy them to sign up for these 2 events. And what we tried to mention earlier too, so these GEFA Water 101 webinars, this is part of a series of 3, the first of 3, the other 2 on your screen. And we will offer a series of 3 GEFA Water 101 webinars later in the year. So I don't want people to be confused. And last year, we didn't actually offer them, partly because we were waiting on some of this information that you're hearing right now. So we're offering these first 3 Water 101 events in the very early part of 2023, and look out for a series of 3 webinars on different but maybe related topics later in the year. Again, it's going to be based on the information that's coming out from EPA and the state. With that, I want to thank everyone for joining today. If you want to hear directly about these events, maybe a colleague forwarded it to you today, the GEFA website also has an email list that you can sign up for if you haven't signed up for that yet. And then at IB Environmental, we also try to push out these kinds of water financing opportunities and learning opportunities. So with that, thanks everyone. Thanks especially to Amanda, who covered a lot of information all on her own today. And it's definitely, if you didn't catch all of it, it's food for thought. You have the links, you'll have the recording eventually, and we encourage you to check that out and stay engaged.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, well, we'll sign off now, everyone. A reminder to use that save chat function. It's the best thing since sliced bread to kind of save those links. We will we'll see you all next time. There's one last question, and we do have 1 minute. Sarah's asking regarding AIS and BABA if obtaining an American-made versus foreign material would substantially delay a project. Is there any consideration for waivers?
Yes. Yes, there is a waiver process. So there's specific documentation that would have to be submitted, what that item is, where you can document that it's going to be a significant lead time. All that would be submitted to EPA. EPA does their due diligence and comes back with a, no, we found this, that can actually get it to you in 3 weeks or whatever that is. but there is a waiver process. And I think I don't have it readily available. If you just Google EPA AIS waiver process, it comes up like that, and you can see the specific documents.
Excellent. Okay, now we are done for real. So we'll sign off, and the chat is not going to be available after we hit this end for all. So go ahead and grab that, but look out for a link with the where you can find the recording of this on YouTube. Thanks, everyone. Great questions. Thanks for your engagement and interest in the topics. Bye.
Thank you all for attending.